So those are our introductions. Great. And Martin has started the recording, and we will be putting that up on our Coffee with a Purpose YouTube channel afterwards. Cody, welcome. Thanks again for coming to speak to us, and turn the floor over to you.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much. Thanks for those introductions. A lot of you I've met before, but it's good to see you all again. Good morning. First of all, I want to thank you again for giving me the opportunity to speak to this group. I really appreciate it. I really all the work that folks in this group have done and continue to do on issues like climate change and affordability and many of the things that were mentioned that are all very important to me as well. And I appreciate you providing these platforms for candidates to speak. I mean, Catherine mentioned how important it was last year, and I think it'll be important again this year. It's a good opportunity to tie those issues to our local government and get people engaged in the local election. So I really appreciate that. So for those who don't know me, just a little bit about myself. My name is Cody Jacobs. My pronouns are he, him. I'm a lifelong activist as well. I'm also someone who I work at BU Law, where I teach legal writing to first-year students. In fact, that's where I am right now. You can't tell because of the Zoom background, but I assure you that's where I am. And I'm also a dad. I'm a dad to two kids. They're 3 and 6 years old. The 6-year-old is a first grader at Brown Elementary School. And we love it here. I'm also a candidate now for Natick Select Board, which is why I'm here. And I'm running for Natick Select Board because we need a strong progressive voice on the Select Board to move Natick forward. Right now, Natick has an opportunity to be a leader that lives up to the values of its people. And I think we can be a leader on a number of issues. I think we can lead on economic justice by shifting the tax burden from working families to commercial landlords, by providing a tax exemption for seniors to help them stay in their home. And, mentioned earlier, the CPA, by funding, adopting a surcharge to fund affordable housing and other priorities. I also think we can lead on social justice by removing racist symbols from our town government, by explicitly protecting and empowering our immigrant communities, and by expanding opportunity to everyone in Natick. And I think we can lead on climate as well by being aggressive about procuring cleaner energy, about encouraging walkability and planning for smart densification. Now, I understand that none of these things will be easy, and working on a multi-member board, let alone within the larger confines of town government, it's going to take compromise, it's going to take listening, and it's going to take cooperation. But I also know that now is a time when we can't be afraid to propose bold progressive solutions to the problems that we face. I think we can do it. I'm not going to talk much longer than that because I really want to, spend this time to hear from you and have a conversation. But I hope that, I hope we have a good conversation today, and I hope you'll consider giving me one of your 2 votes for Select Board on Tuesday, March the 29th. I'll open it up for questions.
Thank you. That's a great elevator speech. You got it honed down there. Pretty good.
Thank you.
Who'd like to open up? And anybody got their hand up yet? Not seeing anybody. There we go. Brian. Oh, you're on mute still, Brian. Good. Brian, get yourself off mute. There you
Sorry.
go.
I think we're in the.
Oh, you muted yourself again. You had it. You had it.
There we go.
There we go.
Back at it once again. So I abut Lake Cochituate and am impacted by the closing that we had this past summer, and am a witness of the water quality degradation that we get here. And it's very disappointing. I think of a community like ours, some of these basic things ought to be addressed, and we ought to start taking some real proactive action, like banning fertilizers and limiting salt use. How do you think you could make that happen?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely appreciate that concern. I'm open to it. I think that as far as making that happen, I think there's a couple things we can do. So the first thing is just dealing with it on a municipal level, as opposed to, thinking about banning it in private use. I think that there are things, the biggest user of salt and fertilizers is the town, right? And so I think in terms of the way that, we have to review, and I talk about this a little bit on my website, that we need to review everything from an environmental perspective that we're putting into the environment, not just from a perspective of, yes, it checks the box, it checks off of being, compliant with law, with, Massachusetts and federal requirements, but is it the best that we can do, right? Is it the best that we can do to avoid polluting our water sources and things like that? And so, I think that, we need to look at that across town government as we're thinking about, what DPW is using to treat the roads, what we're using for, for fertilizer, what we're using to what do you call it when we're talking about, turf versus grass and things like that. So I think it needs to be a priority. Now, I will say that, I'm not a scientist, and so I don't, pretend I'm not going to, I think one of the biggest problems we have in government is people who are substituting their beliefs for, what experts know about things like this. And so, I'm not going to, I would defer to people who know, right, about what, about which practices are things that are the most damaging and how we can mitigate those. But I think that where I would start on that question would be at the municipal, as far as our municipal government and what we're putting out. And then I would go from there with thinking about regulatory measures for the private sector, where, where we might be able to cut back on some of those things as a municipality.
Well, that sounds like in a couple of years, you might move the ball a little bit. I think we ought to move the ball a little more urgently. And it's in front of us, and we ought to acknowledge it and work on it. So good luck.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think I think it is an urgent issue. I mean, it's very, very important to me. Certainly the waterways are one of the most attractive things about our town, and we need to protect them. So I agree with that.
Well, let's see if it's open this summer, or the percentage of it.
Yeah.
I think one of the things on that front is additional education of the residents. There is I spent my career in the hazardous waste site assessment and cleanup business. And there is definitely a mentality out there among some homeowners of, if a little pesticide is good, well, if I dump on a lot, I'll be sure to kill all those suckers. And, if a little fertilizer is good, I'll dump on a lot and my grass will be the greenest you ever saw. So, just even if we could get to the step of having private folks actually use the stuff the way the labels say, would be a big step forward, I think.
Yeah.
But to your point, Cody, as well, I think, having it grounded in science rather than what people believe, because on the flip side of what you were just saying, Sarah, we've got the folks thinking, one molecule of PFAS is going to kill us all in our sleep. And, I'm not saying we don't need to deal with it, but people need to understand concentration levels and, what actually does represent a health threat and what is impractical, or maybe impractical to clean up.
Yeah,
So.
absolutely.
Not, Bill, I see you got your hand up.
Tom had his hand up first. If you could go to him first, I'd love to ask my question, but I think Tom was first in line, if you don't mind.
That's fine. Good eagle eyes. I didn't see it.
Okay, I have two questions, so I'll ask them. First one is, what are your views on CRT?
What are my views? I'm sorry, I didn't hear the question. What are my views on what?
CRT.
On the CRT?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I like the CRT. I mean, I think it's a great thing for our community. I'm happy that it's there. I think it's, I think that we need to find ways to help encourage people to use it, not just for for recreation, but if it's a way that people can actually practically get from one out of town to the other, I think that it'll be positive for encouraging walkability. Things we can do on that. I mean, I'm on the Transportation Advisory Committee. And
CRT is critical race theory.
It's also the Constituent Rail Trail. That's the confusion.
I'm sorry.
Sorry about that.
asking
Sorry about
about.
the confusion.
Also,
Sorry.
cathode ray tube.
I went with
Yeah, the road ray tube. Yes, I love it. All right.
Okay, well, I can.
Raise it.
Critical race
I-
theory.
We'll
Tom.
switch from transportation to critical race theory. How's that?
Okay.
Watch out for that.
So Okay, that's a funny mix of two different kinds of politics there. So critical race theory. So I support critical race theory. So I support, I think we need to teach our children real history. I'm glad, I'm very glad when I see everything that's going on in the news. I'm very glad that we live in a district that, the school committee and Dr. Nolan have been behind the idea of, teaching our kids actual context about racial issues. My daughter, even in first grade, comes home and talks to me about things in a definitely in a more, I think, nuanced way than certainly when I was in first grade in Texas. So I think that it's really important. It's something we have to protect here, that we have that ability to be able to do that, because I think in other, the fact that all over the country now they're trying to suppress real history and people aren't learning the reasons behind the way that things are now and the way that the racism that still exists in our society. That's a real concern. And when I talk in my campaign about progressive values, that's one of the reasons I talk about it, because I feel like progressive values in this country are under attack. They're under attack in terms of what we're able to teach in our schools, in terms of voting rights, and in terms of other issues. And I think that's why in Natick, we need to stand tall and be a leader on the other end of those issues. And it starts with setting an example. Critical race theory is usually talked about in the context of our schools, but I think our town government can set an example as well. I mentioned, racist symbols in my discussion. And, I think that when we talk about issues like our town seal or something like that, or, there's a street name right down, we talk about what we teach in the high school, but right down the street from the high school, there's a street that's named a racial slur. The name of the street is a racial slur. And so, I think it sends mixed messages. So I would like to see, the select board be able to take a leadership role in setting an example on some of these things. And to be clear, we've done a lot of good things. We've taken a lot of good steps in terms of creating the work that we've done with the Equity Task Force, and now hiring a permanent diversity officer. I think are all steps in the right direction. But I think that there are things that are both small and big where I think we can lead by example. So yeah, I guess I'm in favor of both kinds of CRT to bring it back to the.
Thank you. Tom, you had a second question too, right?
Yeah, I got a second one is.
What's the name of the street?
Redmen Drive, I think. Right?
What is it?
Redmen Drive. I
It's
apologize if people are offended by me saying the word out loud.
They
It's
took that.
right across the street from, at least I assume, Cody, that's the street you're talking about. It's right across the street from the recycling center.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, they removed that as the mascot for the high school, but not the street name, because that wasn't.
Oh, I never knew it was there.
Yeah,
Mhm.
I had a friend who lived there years and years ago. So,
Tom, your second question?
Yes, do you have any proposals of any kind on climate control, climate issues?
Yes, I do. I have a couple of things I want to do on
the town could possibly implement?
I'm sorry, I missed the last part of your question. Sorry.
Climate issues, do you have any ideas, proposals that the town could implement to fight climate change?
Yes, I do. That's one of the reasons I'm running. I'm very animated to help us fight climate change. And I think there's a lot we can do on the local level, as all of you probably know. So the select board has control over, our contract that we get for energy aggregation. So when that contract is up every few years, which actually it's going to be up this coming year. So whoever's elected to the select board will have a voice in negotiating that next contract. And that aggregation contract that we negotiate on behalf of our citizens, that then is on your electric bill as the default offering, can have there's control over how much of that comes from renewable energy. Right now, the default offering is 55% renewable, but the select board has taken steps over the last few cycles to increase that on a slow basis, to increase it by about 3% each time. I think maybe we could increase it a little bit faster than that. You know, especially, you know, depending on where energy prices are, you don't want to increase it too fast because then people will opt out and then it'll defeat the purpose of moving people into the plan. But I do think that we might look to be a little bit more aggressive if we're going to get up to our net zero goals. So that's one area. The other area is the power usage by the municipality itself. So a separate contract that the NADIC as a power user negotiates every few years is also going to be up this year and will also be under the control of the select board. And that's an opportunity where we can also set an example by obtaining cleaner power. You know, I think we can get as close as we can to getting 100% renewable. We ask people in their electric bill, do you want to opt up to the 100% renewable option? And I think it would be nice if Natick as a town opted up to 100% renewable. Now, of course, we'll have to look at the cost of that and think about what we're able to do. But you can see in the net zero report that, you know, they did some survey data on this, and it was very overwhelming that people were willing to pay a little bit more in order to obtain cleaner energy, because that's a priority for a lot of people in Natick. So I think that's something that a lot of people would be behind. So that would be a priority for me, is having a voice on that contract to push towards either 100% or at least as close as possible to 100% renewable for our own, for the municipalities' energy. So those are a couple of things. I also think when we're looking at new construction or we're looking at retrofitting buildings, to think about, you know, making sure that our net zero goals are kept in mind, that we're able to that we're creating buildings that are consistent with that we're, you know, kind of setting an example on some of those issues as well. And you know, also encouraging people, continuing to encourage people, which, you know, we have several programs that do that, but continuing to encourage people to switch to electrification and other kinds of heating systems that are going to be more consistent with getting us to net zero. So yeah, so there's a lot we can do. I mean, that's a few of the things that I think are the most important. But yeah, I think that's something that's a big issue in this election.
Thank you, Cody. So
Thank you.
I think I see three hands up, Bill, Martin, and Jay. So Bill, why don't you go next?
Thank you. Cody, you just got my vote. I had asked I was going to ask the same question as Tom. The aggregation for the town, well, you went through them. The one thing you didn't mention was the school, and the school board also has the same issues around negotiating their own rates, and I'd like to encourage us to push them. I know the school board has its own governance, but any influence there would be the same. And another thing on the school board that you didn't happen, or in the school district that you didn't happen to mention, has to do with school buses and getting them electrified. And I know they have an independent contractor, and I believe that contract was renewed recently, but we need to start pushing our contractors or buying our own buses or whatever. Technology there is moving quickly, but anything you can do in that would also be appreciated.
Well, Bill, I'm actually really glad you mentioned the issue about school buses, because, you know, most of the things you just mentioned are within the purview of the school committee and Dr. Nolan, so that would be under their, you know, jurisdiction. However, there is one area that I think is sort of a town, you know, that would involve the town, that has to do with school buses, that I'm passionate about, which is, I think we need to get rid of school bus fees. I think it's a very regressive form. It's creating exactly the wrong incentive for people in our community. When you think about sustainability, when you think about traffic, that it costs several $100s to get a bus pass if you live, you know, more than a couple miles from the school. And that's most bus users. And, you know, it's expensive. So, you know, it's not something that can happen overnight, but I think it's something that we should make a priority, because it's inequitable to charge people money to get to school. And it's not, you know, it's not environmentally friendly to encourage people to have these, you know, people complain about the line at these schools. I mean, there's so many reasons why we should be encouraging people to take the bus rather than discouraging it. And especially if we're able to switch to electrification. And, you know, I think that issue is only exacerbated, obviously, by the closing of Wisconsin, where people are going to be going a longer distance. So that's something I would really advocate for, you know, if I were elected to the select board. And on electrification more generally of vehicles, like certainly there is acquisition on the town side as well there, where we can look for electrification. And I'm heartened that, I know they've been starting to do that with acquiring police vehicles a little bit, at least moving to, more hybrid models, stuff like that. I know there's some DPW vehicles and fire vehicles where that's not possible yet, where the technology doesn't exist. But where it does exist, I think that is a good area for us to work on.
Thank you, Cody. Martin, you had your hand up for a while.
Thank you. Yeah, hi. First of all, thanks, Cody, for stopping by on the door-to-door campaigning. I don't see a whole lot of door-to-door campaigning anymore these days, now that we're more than 35,000 people in Natick, but that was nice. And one thing when you came, I didn't talk that much about, but was the thing that I'm near and dear to my heart, open space. But it turns, as I think about it, the select board has quite a role in open space now that it didn't used to have. So originally, when I started, the Conservation Commission had a conservation fund, which it controlled, which was for open space purchase. That's now been changed to the FAR Bonus Stabilization Fund, which is a mouthful, which is more under the control of the select board, or at least that the select board has the policy decision. So the select board has actually had to deal with several open space purchases in the last few years. 22 Pleasant Street was one, 82 Rockland Street was another, and then Winona Farm, which I think was negotiated confidentially, but none of those worked out, it turns out. But in terms of policy for what the town should spend on open space, do you have any thoughts on that? It's one of many issues, probably not the one people talk about the most, but it is an issue that seems to come up quite a bit.
Yeah, I mean, I think open space is very valuable, and I think it's something that we should be willing to spend money on. But I do, on the other hand, understand that our money is not infinite, obviously. And I mentioned at the beginning, and it was actually mentioned even before that, was talking about the CPA as a way to give us more flexibility to be able to to be able to work on open space, which is one of the things that you're supposed to use CPA money for. And I think that I think that could be a resource that we use. I also think that when we're thinking about, we should be thinking about open space when we're thinking about pieces of land that the town already owns, that are not that are what do you call it, that are not
underutilized.
Yeah, that are underutilized, exactly. Like the Elliott School, for example, is a piece of land that the select board is going to have to make a decision about soon. Now, there's other competing priorities. Obviously, there's affordable housing. There's other things that we need to think about in making a balance there. But yeah, I mean, I do think it's something that's worth continuing to be a priority. I think that it's something that draws people to Natick. It's something that it's something that's very important to our quality of life. So to me, it is worth making a priority, but given the need to balance other things, I think that's why we need to seek as many alternative funding sources for that as possible, and that includes the CPA.
Thank you for that. Jay, I think you're next.
Thank you. Cody, I want to ask you a philosophical question. A member of the select board has two opposing roles. One of them is to represent the people that elected him or her, and the other is to lead those people. And those things often pull in opposite directions. Take 10 seconds to think about your answer. How do you think you would decide on any given issue whether to lead or represent when those two are pulling in opposite directions?
I think that's a really important question. I believe that the most important thing is to be, because I think that a lot of it starts right here in the campaign, right? So I have a website where I make very clear what my priorities are and where I stand on a lot of issues. And obviously you can't foresee every single thing that's going to come up when you're elected, But I think making it clear to people what you're getting into when you vote for me, I think is very important. So that way people understand the value set that I'm going to bring to any decision that I make. Now, that doesn't mean that every decision I make is going to be popular with people. But I think that making sure that I'm transparent about where I stand and what I stand for now, I think is important. So that way people understand when they're voting for me, kind of what they're getting. And so, you know, when I come up on a decision to make that is, you know, between what, you know, I think what my values are versus what I think the majority wants or something like that, I think I would think back to the campaign, and I would think back to, well, you know, what did I, you know, how did I say I would approach this kind of an issue? And, you know, if I can comfortably say, well, even though this position isn't the popular one, if this is the one that I ran on and what I said I was going to do, then I feel pretty comfortable with, you know, being in the minority and going against the will of the people, I guess, in terms of representing people on the select board. I do think it's important to always listen, and, you know, as a select board member, and that's something that I would do, even, you know, when people disagree with me, obviously. But I think from a philosophical perspective, you know, my general inclination is to you know, to be more, I think, on the leading side of that equation than on the following of just what the majority happens to want. People always have, you know, I mean, the democracy thing works both ways, both in terms of me campaigning now and saying what I stand for, and then people can choose to vote for me or not, and me making a decision on the select board, and then I'll be up for re-election and people can vote me out if they disagree with it. But I think that you know, I think that because those checks are in place, I think that's a reason that I would lean towards, you know, more being on the leadership side. And I do think that the select board can play a leadership role on issues where, you know, you know, something's not popular, or maybe it's controversial, and, you know, can bring people along by taking a different stance and explaining the reasoning behind that stance and selling it to people. You know, I think it's an important platform for that kind of a thing. So, you know, that's a long answer, but I think the shorter answer is that I would lean towards more, you know, taking the leadership role as opposed to just representing what people want.
Thank you.
Jay, I see you nodding your head, but I think, you know, given your experience as a previous selectman, I think we'd all be interested in kind of hearing if you've got any reaction to what Cody just said.
I do, and I'd rather keep it private at the
That's
moment.
fine. That's fine. Yeah.
I don't mean that. I
Prerogative.
mean, we're going to be talking to other candidates, and I don't
Yeah.
mean to influence anybody's thinking at this point. After we talk to everybody, sure, but not right.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Okay. Rick, I believe you've got your hand up.
Yeah, I think I have a few questions, a bit that's short. First off, I'm from South Natick Hills, and as you may or may not know, it's a pretty big community, roughly 280 units up here, you know, including 50 townhouses, and the rest are 1-2 bedroom places. And it's a pretty, I'm discovering after 4 years, it's a pretty progressive place. However, the landscaping company that takes care of our property uses literally a mountain of salt, and I don't know how much fertilizer. It's Riverside. I think there are a bunch of us up here that would like to push our board away from that, and it would help us if the town were to set up a thing on this. So the question is, would you, and also it'd be great to get Jay and any other candidates for select board, if we would organize our own internal Zoom up here, and maybe you know, as your campaign manager, Mark could schedule, you know, something like this with us. Be great to have you come and not come literally, but would you guys be willing to speak to this group? Also to politicize it, to make sure people get out and vote. I think it would be very helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. I mean, you know, like I said in my answer to the other thing, I think that, you know, the issues of chemical contamination runoff, I think, are something that's very important, and that we should be working on every chance that we get. So yes, I mean, I'd be happy to do that. So please, like, follow up with me about that.
We follow up with you, or
With
should I follow up
Marty.
with Mark? With
Yeah.
Mark or with you?
Either, you know, I think you,
Okay.
I can circulate my email, in the chat, or maybe, I don't know if Martin can.
Yeah.
Circulate it, but,
Great,
you
great.
can follow up with either of us, but yes, I'd be happy to help on that.
great. And how, Jay, would you be willing to do that?
You're
He's
right.
muted.
Mute.
Okay,
Oh,
yes.
he's
Thank
nodding. Okay,
So,
good.
okay, yeah, I mean, the runoff here goes all the way to the Charles River and into Little Farm Pond and Sherburne. So it, you know, it's a big issue. Secondly, maybe somebody could quickly inform me, can I get an absentee ballot? I'm going to be gone in the month of March and I would love to vote. So I'll ask town
Definitely.
hall.
You can't, yes, you can get an absentee ballot. It is important, though, that everyone knows, which maybe everyone in this group already knows, that like there is no there's no excuse mail-in voting anymore. So you need to be like qualify for an absentee ballot, which you would if you're going to be out of town. Like you just have to, you know, contact.
Okay, I'll follow up then. Thank you. The third thing is, where would electric landscaping equipment fall on your list of priorities? And would you be willing to come to a talk by a scientist on exactly the problems that you know, both environmental and air pollution, sound pollution, and the quality of soil, etc.? Would you be willing to hear the science on that and, you know, begin to consider taking a leadership position on that issue?
Yes, absolutely. I would, you know, and I've definitely read a little bit about this. I can't say that I'm, you know, completely educated on it, which is why it would be great to, you know, I would definitely take you up on that opportunity to hear more. But I have read a little bit about it, and I mean, it does concern me, and I think that's an area where, you know, I know other municipalities have regulated that in Massachusetts. So, you know, I think that that's something that that would be worthwhile. I know that that's a very you know, not the most carbon efficient machines that are doing that, not to mention all the quality of life issues that you mentioned. So yes, absolutely.
Well, it's actually the worst of all carbon polluters, but and it goes on big time up here on South Natick Hills.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yep, thank you.
Cool. I'm not seeing anybody else's hand up at the moment. I know I've got one question of my own, which Cody, you were referring earlier to some of the contracts that are up for renewal. And not contracts specifically, but just in general, what do you see as maybe some of the biggest issues that the town's gonna face, or decisions you know, that are before us for this calendar year?
Well, I think there's a couple of things. I mean, one, I think a big elephant in the room, I guess, is government reform. I think that's the biggest thing. You know, right now there's actually a committee that's being formed by the select board to look at our system of government and think about areas where we need reform, where we need change. And by the way, the applications are still open for that. As of now, I strongly encourage anyone who's interested to apply, because it's going to affect the future of our government potentially for decades. And I think that's a really important issue. I mean, you know, obviously the select board is not going to, you know, unilaterally decide anything about that, but I think it's an issue on which obviously you know, whoever's on the select board will have a voice. And I think that's something that, you know, as a town, we're going to be talking about hopefully over the next year as the committee does their work. And I think it's long overdue. You know, frankly, they've been talking about creating this committee for a couple of years, and I wish it had been created earlier, because the process for getting to making changes to the town charter is very lengthy, especially if we go to a full charter commission. So, you know, but I understand, you know, the on the other hand, the need to go slow and make sure that we get it right. But you know, that's something that is a big issue that's going to be facing the town. I do have some, you know, opinions about it now, but I'm also, you know, open to hearing what the committee has to say, obviously, once they come back with their findings. But I can share with you my opinions about it now, are that, you know, I think our system of government while it has some strengths, I mean, I personally love it. I've loved being able to get involved, you know, fairly easily and, you know, have a big voice in a lot of conversations. And, you know, like town meeting is so much fun, honestly. I mean, you know, my wife thinks I'm a huge nerd, but I think it's so much fun. And you know, it's great, right? But I think that the problem is that, like, it's great for people like me who are really blessed to have a lot of time to be able to get super involved and go to all these meetings and, you know, just, you know, really dive into it. But I think for people who are on the outside, who maybe are more, you know, engaging with the government just on the level of voting, right? Like their only way to engage with the government is to vote. And the only way they can hold the government accountable if they want to change is to vote for a different candidate or something like that. And I think in our form of government, especially with how big our town has become, that's really difficult to do, to just hold the government accountable with your vote. You know, with town meeting, the seats are rarely contested. Even when they are, it's not like, you know, the various platforms of the candidates. Of course, there's elections for select board and school committee and other offices that are townwide that are, you know, a little bit more often contested. But even those, you know, with power being so diffuse over the different boards and town meeting itself, it's really hard to just hold the government accountable with your vote. And I think because of that, it makes people a little bit more disengaged. And I mean, if you look at our voter turnout in the last election, you know, the last town election last year, we had a very vigorously contested election for school committee and for select board, with high quality candidates running, you know, pretty vigorous campaigns on both sides. And the turnout was only 13%. Whereas, you know, in Framingham, they had an election the same year. I'm again not saying we need to go all the way to a city, but like they had an election the same year for their city offices, and their turnout was 30%. And I think part of that is because people kind of intuitively have an understanding that their vote matters a little bit more in that system of government than it might matter in ours. So I think it's something we need to think about. I think there's other reasons for it as well, you know, as far as attracting businesses to town and stuff like that. I think it's not exactly the most business friendly form of government either, as we're trying to, you know, we're trying to keep our commercial growth going. So I see that as a big issue. Again, you know, obviously you can kind of tell where my priors are on this, but I also, you know, I don't want to jump out in front of the committee either. And I would listen with an open mind to what they have to say. And I do think there are tinkers short of a full overhaul that would be good for our government as well. But that's a huge issue that I see coming up. And I see there's other hands, but I think the other issue coming up is the other big issue that I'll highlight, and then I'll go to questions, is just the fiscal picture for Natick, which I don't know if, you know, if this will be coming up in this year or if it'll be coming up in future years, but we've been in a budget, you know, not deficit, but we've been in there's been a budget gap for a while where we've had to take money from stabilization funds and things like that. And, you know, we're heading towards a situation where we're going to need to either cut services or have an override vote. And, you know, I'm someone who obviously doesn't want to cut services. I think there's a lot of important things the town does. And I think there's, as you've heard from some of my other priorities, I think there's more things the town should do. But on the other hand, I'm sensitive to the fact that property taxes are regressive, and, you know, raising property taxes hurts people who are on fixed incomes, who are, you know, struggling to stay in their homes. And so I think we need to think about ways that we can mitigate that impact before we think about an override, or maybe in conjunction with an override. So anyway, that's a couple of the two like giant things I kind of see as coming before the near future.
Yes, thank you for naming them. Yeah, I agree with you on both. Huge. Martin.
Yeah, talking about the joys of getting involved in town government. You may have covered this and I wasn't paying attention, but can you talk about some of the ways you've been involved in Natick government? And, you know, the one that I recall is the move for a minimum wage for town workers, but I may have missed some of the other times you've been involved.
Yeah, sure. So I'll just like list like the things I'm involved in, and then I can talk, you know, more specifically about the minimum wage issue and other things that I've worked on. But so I am a town meeting member. I'm also on the Transportation Advisory Committee, which is an advisory committee to the select board that works on transportation issues. And I am on the Brown School Council, which, you know, there's little individual councils for each school where parents kind of advise the school and kind of serve as a conduit between the parents and the school itself and the school committee and the administration. So those are the three things that I'm, official ways that I'm involved in things in town. And then, yeah, I've worked on, so recently I worked on I've worked on trying to raise the minimum wage for town employees to $15 an hour. Those who are on town meeting with me already know this. But the minimum wage was going to go up anyway at the end of this calendar year, but I thought we should take the step of raising the minimum wage earlier to show, moral leadership for the town, and also to do the right thing for our town employees. We praise our town employees a lot, and I think this is something that went beyond praise and was something that was actually monetarily helpful. And I think, and I recognize this is at the time that I was advocating for it, but the people at the bottom certainly aren't the only town employees who are more than deserving of a raise. And I do think we want to make sure that we're competitive when we're retaining some of these people who are, very, very good town employees, but could easily go to other places. And so when thinking about it, it's not just, I think the moral issue is reason enough to raise the wages for people. But I also think that we need to think about, retention, and think about being competitive in this environment where, it's kind of the economics of it are more, there's more power in the hands of the workers. So, that's something I've worked on. Other issues I've worked on, being on the transportation committee, I worked on the effort to, and kind of have continued to work on it after it's been enacted, but the effort to lower speed limits in town. So I actually worked with Elaine's son, Josh, on that issue, and Josh had been actually working for that for a long time. And then, I kind of helped him in the last year as we brought that before town meeting. And I think it's a really good initiative because it can make the town a little bit more pedestrian friendly, make it a little bit easier for people who are being mobile in other ways. And of course, making accidents less deadly is always good. So, we worked on getting that through town meeting, and now are currently in conversation between, our committee, the select board, and the safety committee, and the police department, and other stakeholders, and trying to figure out how to implement that. And doing things along those lines. So those are a couple of examples of things I've been involved in.
Thank you for that, Cody. Tom, you got your hand up.
Yeah, this is, I guess, more of a philosophical question. You indicated, I think when Jay asked you that question, you said you'd be willing to be the minority vote if it was something you believed in. What if it came to be 75% what you want, but 25% what you don't want? Would you be willing to consider that as something you would vote for, as opposed to being 100% of what you want?
Yes. That's the short answer to your question is yes, I would be willing to consider that. I think the longer answer is that, of course, it's hard to say that in the abstract, right? Like what 25 and 75% means in the context of a particular issue. But definitely, I think that, and I mentioned this in my opening remarks, that I think, if you're on I've got, as you can see, I've got plenty of ideas about things that I think the town should do, but I understand that this is a multi-member committee, a multi-member board that is not, that only has limited powers itself and needs to work with other stakeholders in government. So the nature of that is that it will require compromise in order to get anything done. And I'm not, I certainly have principles, I have values that I think are very important, and I'm not gonna compromise on some of those. But in terms of compromising on the specifics of how to get there for particular issues, that is something I'm willing to do. And I am definitely definitely willing to do that. I can give you an example from my professional life. I worked, before I got into teaching, I worked for a gun control, for a nonprofit that was pushing for gun control legislation. They actually ultimately became part of Giffords now, but at the time they were a separate entity that was pushing for gun control legislation at the state level. And I can tell you, we had plenty of compromises that were probably worse than 75-25. But you know what? We still helped to protect people at the end of the day by getting something, getting things through that I think were helpful to make our gun control laws stronger. So that's, I think, an example of the type of thing where I think I understand the need to negotiate, and often to say that half a loaf is better than nothing.
I think Mick
Right,
Jagger
thank
said
you.
it best, right?
Yeah.
You can't always get what you want, but if you try sometime.
Right. Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. Yes.
So we're approaching 10 o'clock. I'm not seeing anybody else's hands up at the moment, but do folks have closing questions, comments? Rick, Rick and Deb. Great. Okay, Rick, you go first.
I'll defer to Debbie. She's probably got a better question.
Thanks. This is not a topic I normally am talking about, but you raised the idea about gun control, which I do care very much about. And it concerns me as a citizen that there are gun shops in Natick. I don't know if there's anything the select board can do about that, but I wanted to just float it out there and see what you know and what you think.
That's a great question, and actually, I'm glad you asked, because I'll answer about gun shops specifically, but then I want to talk about the gun issue more generally, because I think it's important. On the gun shop specifically, there are limits legally to what Natick can do, what any municipality can do to keep gun shops specifically out of their town, right? So unfortunately, as you know, there's a very right-wing judiciary now. And there, even before that, there were some Second Amendment precedents that prohibit you from completely banning the sale of guns within a particular municipality. So we wouldn't be able to do that. Now, some restrictive zoning regulations, those may be permissible. Again, that would more be within the purview of the planning board than the select board. But where you could, for example, prohibit gun shops within a certain amount of feet of residential areas, or within a certain amount of feet of schools, or something like that. I know at least one gun shop that's basically in a residential area now. But in terms of thinking about future gun shops, that is an area where regulation is possible. But I think on the issue of guns more broadly, I think what you're bringing up is very important, because there is about to be, we're on the verge of seeing a sea change in what gun laws are like in Massachusetts. And the reason is because of the Supreme Court. So, there's a case right now that's at the Supreme Court that is going to, and I actually wrote for a plug, but I wrote an op-ed about this in the Boston Globe that was published a few months ago that you can read if you Google it. But there's a case at the Supreme Court right now that's about concealed carry laws. It's a challenge to New York's concealed carry regime, which is pretty restrictive and kind of similar to Massachusetts. I'll tell you, it's pretty likely to get struck down as violating the Second Amendment, which would mean that Massachusetts would have to adopt a broader, a more loose concealed carry regime that would allow a lot more people to carry concealed guns who want to. And if we do that, it's going to be, there may be a lot of power in the hands of municipalities to be able to cite specific restrictions on where those guns can be carried. Right now, we don't really worry about that in Massachusetts. There are not that many people who are licensed to carry, but I'm telling you that's going to change. So it will be up to Natick and other municipalities to decide, okay, you can't carry guns at playgrounds, or you can't carry guns at certain municipal buildings or something like that. So some of that, again, maybe it depends on how they react in terms of at the State House to this, but I'm saying that that's one of the issues that I would be keeping my eye on, as if I were to be in this position. I guess even if I'm not, because I'm still a citizen here. As far as the areas where I think our local government can, kind of going back to the theme I was mentioning earlier about our progressive values being under attack nationally, where our local government can try to protect our citizens here in Natick.
Thank you for that. Frightening.
Yeah, no, it is.
Yeah. Rick, you lowered your hand. Did you have anything else you wanted to add, or no?
No, it's another can of worms for another time.
All right, we'll stay away
Lots
from
of
that
worms
one.
around.
Yeah. Well, it is the top of the hour, and I do want to be mindful. We want Cody to be prepared for his class. So, I mean, if people have parting thoughts or questions that they want to ask, chime in. But I want to take this opportunity to thank you for coming to speak to us. It's been really great to hear your thoughts about a number of different issues. We look forward to hearing the folks that you're you'll be running against, and we obviously welcome you to attend that as well. So you can, if you would like to, but anybody else have anything else they want to share? Ricky?
I just wanted to ask, you mentioned the Second Amendment and the right to carry. What is the justification? I thought the Second Amendment, I think it was a misrepresentation of the intent of the Second Amendment, the modern interpretation. But where is the right to carry? I thought it was gun ownership, and that the right to carry didn't enter into the constitutional justification for everybody and his uncle to have a gun.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. I mean, you're preaching to the choir on that. I agree with you 100%. In fact, like, there have been regulations on public carrying going all the way back to the founding, really. So, the argument is very weak for why, it protects a right to carry a gun outside the home. But, we have a court now that's very ideologically motivated, and they're going to find a reason. They've already talked about it. You heard it I heard it because, again, I'm a nerd, so I heard it at the oral argument. But they talked about, things like, what if, you need a gun to protect, for them, the right is all about like the ability to protect yourself in case you're attacked, because they sort of live in this like fantasy land where like the gun's going to protect them if they're attacked or whatever. And so, their justification for it is, oh, well, you're just as likely to face attack outside the home as inside the home. The need to protect yourself is still as strong. So the right is still there. And again, I don't agree with that. That's what I think they will say. So that's kind of where it's motivated from. But it's a concern, and I mean, and it's not just guns. We know it's on a number of issues that the Supreme Court is going to be hearing over the next however long, next decades or whatever. And it's reasons that we need to do everything we can proactively here locally and on the state level to protect our way of life.
Well, the one thing that we've done at a local level has been, Jay and I have spearheaded 2 gun buybacks as a way of getting some guns that might be an easy way out for someone contemplating suicide, or for children playing cops and robbers, or for people in the heat of a domestic violence incident to just grab. We felt it was important to get as many guns out of circulation as possible. But I just wonder what other local constraints can be put on the omnipresence of guns, even if the current judgment is that everybody is entitled to have one.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, again, I feel like if, depending on how this decision comes down, I do think there will still be leeway to ban guns in particular locations. So I think that's sort of the, kind of what the next frontier of it would be if there was. I also think that there's an idea that I've had, that I think municipalities could empower local businesses to be able to ban guns there, which I think is something that would be harder for a court to touch or something like that, because property owners have control over their own property. And so being able to make maybe a guide or some kind of like consistent signage that businesses could have to keep guns out of their business. I mean, we here in Natick, like we have the mall, which is a huge place with a huge footprint that is essentially a public place, but of course is owned by a private company, right? So like if they were to ban guns there, that would be good. That would have a good impact. But right now, there hasn't even been a necessity to think about this, because we've been fortunate to have a very very good gun laws here that have kept people from public carrying. But once that's happening, once it is omnipresent, like what you're saying, Ricky, like then, then I think we need to think about these other things, about location restrictions on certain public property where we're allowed to restrict it, and empowering private businesses to be able to restrict it in those places.
I imagine you're aware of Representative Linsky's activity nationwide with respect to gun, just,
Yeah.
he's very active in that.
Yeah, he's been very good on those issues.
As a reminder, by the way, he's going to be speaking to us on Valentine's Day, I believe.
That's correct.
Yeah. Jay, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I would just point out that you cannot bring alcohol onto school property, but you can carry a gun onto school property right now. So there's a need for some action in that area.
Yeah, no, that's frightening. Yeah, and I mean, I think that it's something where it hasn't been. I mean, there probably is need now, right? But like, it hasn't been as at the forefront just because we're so used to the idea that public carrying is relatively rare here. But that is going to change. And I think you want to ignore it because it's so scary and bad. But I think rather than ignoring it, we should be proactive about doing things like what Jay suggested.
Yeah. I'd like to shift gears here just for a second, not seeing people's hands raised. Deb, I know you were hoping for a brief promo spot for Eco-Natick and Earth Day.
Thanks, Doug. So the Eco-Natick is a website that we're building that will enable anyone to go on and report what you're doing to protect the planet. And we're going to launch it prior to Earth Day and use it as a place for people to see all the things that are going to happen on Earth Day. We're hoping this will be a townwide festival, not necessarily centralized on the common, but distributed like an open studio model, where different organizations and individuals can host a hands-on outdoor educational or fun activity that is earth friendly. I'm imagining things like a kids bike parade on the Cochituate Rail Trail, or the Natick Community Organic Farm giving a demonstration of how they're using no-till when they plant their seeds to reduce the carbon emissions from tilling the soil. I'm imagining individual citizens who want to give someone a tour of their heat pump and their solar panels and how they've gone all electric. So these are some examples, and we're hoping to attract a number of people and organizations in town to have some kind of activity. I know Spark Kindness is already on board, and a number of the libraries we hope to get involved. We hope someone will give a talk about the Charles River Dam discussion down at the dam. So this is all in my head, but it's, and a bunch of people who are here are helping with this. It's in their heads too. And we are gathering a planning team that is going to make this happen on April 30th and May 1st. So if you know someone who would like to be involved in creating an opportunity, creating an activity, it will go on our map, which will be on our website. There will also be a schedule of events. It'll be Saturday and Sunday, April 30th and May 1st.
And so if people do have ideas, how do they make those known? Do they reach out to you individually or what?
If people want to host an event, they can contact me. We're in the process now of creating the sign-up form so that they can actually tell us what they have in mind and give us their info.
Great. Maybe you can toss your contact information in the chat just to remind folks of what it is.
I can see the wheels turning in Ricky's head already. She's going to volunteer to host her new garden, aren't you, Ricky?
I think we should absolutely have an event at your garden so everyone knows that it's there. There should be, maybe you want to have kids can plant sunflower seeds there, or the sky's the limit.
Sounds good. No, I was thinking of Tecan and trying to think how, you know,
Yes.
what songs, you know, should be the background for a lot of what's going on. This land is your land, you know, and some
Well,
of the
that's what-
other.
Yes, TCAN was actually on my mind because I was thinking maybe they would host a climate documentary screening, you know, so people,
What a
to
neat
make people
idea.
aware.
I like that. I like that a lot.
I do too.
Okay.
Great. Cool. Well, does anybody else have any things they wish to add? We are past 10, so we probably should be drawing to a close pretty soon, but
Well,
Doug, I don't
it
want to put
was,
it in the chat because it'll go away at the end, I think, but if you're able to circulate my email to everyone, that would be helpful, please.
sure. Yeah,
'Cause
I
I know a
will.
lot of people said they wanted to follow up, so yeah, just that way they can.
Yep. Yep.
Thank
I'll definitely do that. Yeah.
well, I want to thank Cody for being flexible and being willing to jump in at the last minute to come. Apparently, Catherine had a conflict. And so thank you very much. I thought that was good.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you guys. I had a lot of fun talking to you actually. So thank you. And it's good to.
Yeah.
Well.
Yeah. And just as a reminder, so next week we will have Bruce Evans and then David Linsky. Then we'll take the week off for President's Day, and then Catherine will come back at the end of the month. And then Ricky, you and Ian are scheduled to speak to us in early March about the event you and he are planning to celebrate your 75 years.
Right, right.
Yeah, yeah. All right. Well, thank you all for joining. And Martin, thanks for taking care of the recording and everything. And have a great day and the rest of the week.
Thank you, Cody.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you all.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you,
Bye.
Wiseman. Thank you, Bull
Thank you.
Boys.